The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Half-Length Tuesday, although it's probably not fair to call it that because the length of all of the shows is being scaled back little by little here as we head into the fantasy playoffs, where we're no longer predicting months in advance, and instead we're taking each individual night as it comes as part of our assessment of streaming calendars and fantasy playoff formats. I'm Dan Besbris. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, a hoop ball presentation, and also brought to you, as all of our podcasts are, by the good folks over at Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. I'll tell you more about them a little bit later on in the podcast. However, I would love it if you guys could take a moment to visit hawaiianisles.com or check them out on Twitter at HI Kona Coffee. Here's the thing. I am somewhere just shy of 3,000 Twitter followers, which is pretty cool, but that's not the point. By the way, thank you to all of you guys that follow me for some weird reason. I'd love it if a handful of you guys could also follow at HI Kona Coffee. Let them know that Dan sent you, and maybe they'll throw a coupon your way. I don't know. I'm not making any promises, but I think it'll be tough for them to say no if I'm just putting them on blast like this, which today I decided I would. You know what? I'm a beer deep. I'm doing the podcast in the evening. We're calling out names. We're saying our good buddies at Hawaiian Isles, they got to get something good to go. You know, we had a coupon back near the trade deadline that was Hoop Ball. I bet they'll fire that bad boy back up if we ask them nicely. But you got to be nice about it. Okay? You can't be mean. Got to be nice. It was a relatively uneventful Monday by all accounts. We actually had a lot of pretty wimpy fantasy lines on Monday night. It's looking up and down the card, finding the folks that actually put together really impressive days that you expected was not that easy. Bradley Beal probably falls into that mix. I think you could argue Kemba Walker is an expected name putting together a big ball game. James Harden was fine, but unspectacular. I mean, it was a weird day. Paul George was crummy. He only took 8 shots in that win. Weird ball game, man. Really weird day. Who scored? Who did anything for these teams? I don't know. Strange day. Strange birds are these. That's basically what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be breaking down Monday, looking ahead to Tuesday on a relatively mundane. It's not fair to call the content of today's episode mundane, but I don't think it's going to be particularly earth-shattering or game-changing stuff. This is all about plotting in advance and category hunting. So this is a time of year where we're really just doing kind of a secondary edition of the box score breakdown. Our guys over on the evening pod, the box score breakdown guys, Neil Rochlani, Adrian Benjamin's doing a wonderful job of this. We're just adding to it. This is like an adjunct box score breakdown. And that's the way the last month of the NBA season goes here on Fantasy NBA Today. Month and a week. We'll basically call it March and then the end of the season, first 10 days of April. And it's strange, I know. It diverges slightly from what we're used to on this podcast, which I'll admit is actually more fun for me. I really like bringing on new guests, getting to know kind of fresh faces, fresh voices, digging into some of the teams. That's what we're looking for early and middle parts of the year. That's where we're saying, okay, well, let's find a Hornets beat writer to tell us what the plan is going forward. Is Jeremy Lamb going to see minutes down as the season progresses? Is Miles Bridges going to be playing more? Is Malik Monk something that's going to stick? These little things that at the beginning of the year, the folks that follow the teams closely really have a better notion of than those of us like myself. I follow basically every team in the NBA as close as I possibly can, but a lot of that involves watching the games as they're happening, tracking Twitter best I can. But as much as that's all fantastic, talking to these people is so fantastic to say, hey, here's what happened at freaking practice. I was at practice, and this is what I witnessed. I can't do that myself. I can't be in 30 different arenas every 2 days. So to me, that's actually the most fun, is the long-term game planning. This is the stressful part. This is where we're just really hunting a stat. Here's a guy, he gave me a stat. What do I do with it? So that's what we're doing now. Toronto, Cleveland, blown out. The Raptors? The Raptors were blown out in this ballgame. Serge Ibaka was ejected for attacking Marquise Chris after a stare down. Who cares? Kevin Love had 16 and 18. He's sitting out tonight's basketball game, but boy, he's been fantastic down the stretch for the Cavaliers. They're a totally different team with him on the floor. Colin Sexton played well in this ballgame. He shot the ball well, and that's basically what his game requires. Can you trust him on a night-to-night basis? Probably not. Brandon Knight, he actually had a decent ball game as well. And therein lies the issue here. This was a team we were looking at streaming, and so the question that I think I asked was, do we dare stream Brandon Knight? Well, so far it looks like it actually would have been a pretty good idea. I don't know if it carries over to the next day. This team, overall, in a fantasy landscape, Sexton's been so bad from a percentages standpoint that you just can't throw him into your lineup, but when he's good, it can be pretty cool looking. I mean, 28 points is not nothing. Kevin Love is the guy on that team. Larry Nance Jr. is out, so Ante Zizic steps into a bigger role right now. I would assume he'll play 20-something minutes tomorrow, or tonight as well, I should say. Over on the Toronto side, Kyle Lowry turned his ankle late in the fourth quarter of a blowout loss, which is exactly the reason that you don't play a guy late in a blowout game. And you don't see it happen very often, but here it was. And then everybody else was, aside from Kawhi Leonard, was not particularly good. Even Pascal Siakam had an off game. And Marc Gasol is basically droppable, which is a real freaking shame, but here we are. Whatever. What does this mean for Kyle Lowry for tonight's or their next basketball game? Well, they're a couple days away. They've got 2 days off. They play Monday, Thursday, Sunday. I think they go every third day this week. So I don't know. I mean, if this ankle thing keeps him out for a game, is this really going to cost the Raptors anything? They're hosting the Lakers. It's not a game that they should have any trouble winning. I wouldn't be surprised if Lowry sat that one out, which is pretty much his playoff MO when it comes to fantasy sports. Not too worried about the rest of these guys. With the 2 days off, they should be okay. But they're struggling right now. Make no mistake, the Raptors are scuffling. I don't know that anybody's really taken heed of the fact that Toronto hasn't quite looked like themselves lately. But the Raptors, I know 6-4 in their last 10 seems okay, but it hasn't been a particularly rough portion of the schedule. And suddenly they're 2.5 games of the Bucks. And they're totally safe from the 76ers, the Pacers, the Celtics. Those teams are nowhere near Toronto. So the only reason to push right now for the Raptors is to try to pass Milwaukee, because they actually have a better record than anybody in the Western Conference by about 3 games. 2 games, making my numbers right after this loss, and they're 2.5 games back of the Bucks. They're in their own bubble. So what's the point? If you're looking at potential options for Wednesday, there's a very real chance that a guy like Jeremy Lin cuts loose in that ball game if Lowry doesn't play. So something to look ahead to. A stream more on the Roto side because their schedule's not very good. But, you know, you milk one game out of a guy playing 30-something minutes one night. Maybe that does the trick. I got a bunch of questions about Nemanja Bjelica, and I basically said, I honestly don't know. I didn't really trust him, and then he put up a good ball game. Marvin Bagley was ruled out I'm getting my days mishmashed here. By Monday morning, he remains questionable for their next game. Sacramento has a good schedule this week, so they're obviously hoping that he can go in the next 3. I guess I'll believe it when I see it. For a team that scored 115 points in this game, there weren't that many overwhelmingly positive fantasy lines. It was mostly Bjelica, and De'Aaron Fox had 23 and 8, but 6 turnovers, and he went 5 for 8 at the free throw line, kind of put a weird lid on that one. Bradley Beal looked good. Tomas Satoransky had a wonderful ball game. Again, he's been a fantastic pickup. Bobby Portis played well. Trevor Ariza had a double-double. Jabari Parker had 18 points, one of his weird little explosions. And Thomas Bryant played only 14 minutes, so he's an easy cut at this point. I know the percentages were floating him for a while, but his minutes have been trending down. Washington, for some reason, stays afloat with this win. They're now 28 and 39. They're 3.5 games back of the Miami Heat, so they're not technically eliminated, but the fact that the Magic and the Hornets sit in between them and Miami is reason for a very small amount of pessimism. Reasons for optimism: the Heat, the Magic, and the Hornets haven't won a game recently, within the last 2 days. And the Wizards did, so they gained ground on everybody. Which, if you're a fan of a tanking team in the Western Conference, you're thinking, this is freaking glorious. The Wizards are at 28 wins, 39 losses. And then there are teams like the Grizzlies, who are 28-40. Mavericks are 27-39. Pels are 30-39. Lakers are 30-36. All of these teams are like, yeah, Washington, keep trying, you clowns. But for their fans, I'm sure they enjoy it. And certainly right now, Beal, Sato, Ariza, those are easy starts. Portis, who put up a nice 9-category line. This one sometimes struggles in the more category-ish formats, but he was good in this ball game, and you can probably keep using him because it looks like he's won that job outright. Detroit, a team that was surging lately, rolling, walked into Brooklyn and just got waxed. Andre Drummond couldn't make a shot to save his life, but he did have 20 rebounds. Blake Griffin was horrible. Detroit shot 28% in this basketball game. That is really epically bad. I don't know where it came from. They've actually been putting the ball in the hoop pretty regularly. And so for Brooklyn, the minutes were a little bit screwball. Spencer Dinwiddie's been scoring well lately, so that's certainly something he's useful for right now. Rodion Skurix has been playing well. D'Angelo Russell wasn't needed as much, but he had an okay line. Alan Crabb was better. This was one where the blowout was early, and so you just sort of had to take what you got. Finally, one big fantasy line. Kemba Walker, 40, 10, and 7 in a 12-point loss at Houston. Jeremy Lamb inserted back into the starting lineup, and a lot of us, myself included, were thinking, man, he's got to cut loose in this one, right? Zeller, Parker, Batum, and Williams all sat this game out, as Charlotte said, whatever, scheduled loss in Houston. We'll try to win our next one. And Lamb only had 8 points on 12 shots. Boo nuts to that. Dwayne Bacon, he had a one-game little thing. Willie Hernan-Gomez and Bismack Biyombo and Frank Kaminsky all split the center minutes, so that wasn't very fun. It was basically just Kemba Walker and a bunch of garbage. I would assume, I could be wrong, but again, reading the tea leaves a little bit, I think everybody will be back for the Hornets. Their next game isn't until Friday. They're off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think all 4 of those guys play on Friday. Zeller, Parker, Batum, Williams. I think this was a scheduled defeat. They've got games in Washington and Miami coming up on Friday and Sunday. The Hornets, those are the teams, Washington right behind them, Miami in the 8th seed. They can almost push themselves back into a playoff spot with back-to-back wins this weekend. Huge games coming up. And they knew they were going to lose this one, so what the hell. On the Houston side, the one thing we were keeping an eye on was Kenneth Faried. He logged 20 minutes and had 16 and 9 with a steal and a block. The question is this his role going forward? He basically saw the backup center minutes and about $1.50 at power forward. And that's not enough. I know that it was tonight, and he made all 6 of his free throws, which is unusual for Faried, but 19.5 minutes is not enough if you're looking for standard league value. If you're looking for someone to float you in rebounds and field goal percent, he's your guy, almost regardless of how many minutes he gets. But if you're looking for someone who's inside the top 100, it's not him in 19 minutes. He needs more like 24 to 26 to get into that territory. It was certainly encouraging, though. First game back from injury. Do we see this number get up to 22, 23 in a different scenario? Maybe playing a team that has a stronger power forward on the floor. Charlotte tends to go relatively small at the 4 spot on most nights. So maybe not a great matchup. Certainly an easy one to rebound in. Rockets out-rebounded the Hornets 55-39 in this game. You think Cody Zeller wasn't missed? Eric Gordon made half of his shots. That's a story in and of itself. Chris Paul actually had a double-double in points and rebounds. Rockets are playing well these days, but this was a pretty easy ball game. Oklahoma City and Utah. This was an under, wasn't it, though? Total was set at 226. And this one didn't even get that close to 200. Woof. Russell Westbrook quietly shooting the ball much, much better from the field. He can't make a free throw to save his life, but 23, 11, and 8. He led the charge in this one because Paul George was not good. 14, 11, and 4, 3 steals and a block. This is a game that, again, if you're getting your playoffs going right now, you really wanted more out of Paul George. And I know this because I have him almost everywhere. Dennis Schroeder stepped up as well. Not that that was anything to care about, really. For the Jazz, we were thinking about different guys to stream on this team. There were questions about whether or not you go Dante Exum or Royce O'Neal or Kyle Korver or Jay Crowder. I basically said I thought the safe play was Crowder. As it turned out, Royce O'Neal was the guy who had the big ball game with Ricky Rubio questionable. Korver got his 22 minutes, but just couldn't make a shot. Dante Exum only played 15 minutes. He couldn't make a shot. And it was an insanely low-scoring game, which I have to assume will be better for Utah on the Thursday back-to-back. So whatever you did, just stick with it. Don't panic. I know for me, I had Korver in a streaming spot. Not a good game, but he did at least get you 2 steals. And you got to hope that in the back-to-back, he'll get you something like 4 3-pointers. That would now make it worth your while. If you went Royce O'Neal, congratulations. You rolled the dice, and you rolled boxcars, or Yo 11. I don't know what game you're playing right now. Clippers and Celtics, there isn't a whole lot really to take note of in this thing. Pat Beverly, Lou Williams, Danilo Gallinari. Lately, Montrezl Harrell has been fading a little bit. Ivica Zubac has been getting called against slightly larger centers, but not enough for it to be a thing on a night-to-night basis. Landry Shamet is playing pretty big minutes for the Clippers, but he's really a three-point specialist and very little else on that front, so I continue to trust the same guys. And then with Boston, just too many mouths to feed. Every game, it's too many mouths to feed. Jaylen Brown got the start in this one with Jason Tatum out. It's not clear exactly when he's coming back, but they don't think it's going to be all that long. From a streaming standpoint, I hope that most of you took the advice we gave last week, which was load up on Clippers and Cavs, whoever they may be. And this is the beauty of it. If your Cavs didn't perform all that well today, which actually would be a little bit surprising because the Cavs scored 126 points, and so basically all of the normal Cavaliers had a decent ballgame. You could have streamed Zizic, Clarkson, Love, Knight, even Osman, Sexton, even Nick Stauskas freaking had a decent ball game, and you'd be in pretty good shape. Clippers, maybe a little bit less so. Their fringe guys were not quite as impressive. It was kind of the core dudes for this team. Shai was decent enough, I suppose. Shamet, he did kind of what you were hoping out of him, but nothing spectacular, right? There was no game changers in these mix, but this is the beauty of starting your week with a back-to-back. Your opponent might be relying on someone who either has one game between Monday and Tuesday or none. Don't forget, there are a couple of teams that don't even play until Wednesday this week. Atlanta doesn't play until Wednesday. Golden State doesn't play until Wednesday. Memphis, Miami, Orlando, Phoenix. These are teams that don't even play Monday and Tuesday. So your Clippers are out there just rolling up whatever little stats they get, and that's infinitely more than whatever your opponent's getting out of those guys. And this is, again, why streaming is such a big deal. Sometimes you don't even need great ball games. Or look at it from another perspective. Let's say you had, I don't know, Paul George, Chris Paul, a star, a stud today. Chris Paul is iffy on that regard. Let's say you had Kyle Lowry, who didn't have a particularly strong basketball game. I mean, percentages-wise, I guess his game was pretty good. Let's say you had someone on the Kings that you were relying on for a big ball game. Blake Griffin, there's a good example of someone who crapped himself on Monday night. Most of the Nets, who had to do their damage in 2.5 quarters. I'm bringing up all these examples, not just to illustrate all the really good basketball players that had kind of poor Mondays from a fantasy perspective, but to note the fact that if you maxed out your games played, you're able to cover those bad games with additional, relatively quiet, but also not insignificant games that you just sort of roll on top of whatever you've put together already. For me, it was enormous. It was enormous because I tried streaming Kyle Korver, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Landry Shamet. I threw all those guys into the mix. And yes, Korver was not good. Shamet, Gilgeous-Alexander were okay. Not horrible, but okay. And they covered for the fact that Paul George didn't have a Paul Georgian line. If I don't make those moves, Jeremy Lamb too. He and Paul George Let's see. Paul George on the year averages 28 points a game. Lamb averages 15.5. So they should have combined for 43 points. They combined for about half of that. By streaming, I was almost able to make up the difference. I was basically able to make up the difference. Sorry. Catch me on that. So my guys underperformed for a day, but guess what? It doesn't matter because I filled in the gaps with randos. Now, it's not going to work all week long. I'm going to need these guys. The magical law of averages needs to actually play itself out because Paul George had arguably his worst game of the entire season on the first day of the fantasy playoffs. Is his shoulder not right? I would probably argue it's not. Is this his lowest scoring game of the season? No, he had an 11-point game on November 1st. And I believe he tied, didn't he have a 14-point game late last month? Yeah, a 14-point game coming out of the All-Star break as well. So it's not the first time. It won't be the last. Certainly on back-to-back games here, he scored 29 points over 2 games. He's slumping at absolutely the wrong time. They're on a road trip. Maybe he's a dude that just needs to get home. Maybe just a dude that needs to get home. Go nuts back in Oklahoma City. But whatever it is, we're buying ourselves time through the magic of the streaming slot. And make no mistake, I am going to be going bonkers with these streams. There is zero question that on Wednesday at 12:01 a.m. Pacific time, I will be flipping those dudes for somebody else. Somebody who's got a really good schedule for as long as possible. I've said it before. Highlight a stretch on your streaming calendar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Call it 11 days. And find teams that are playing 7 times in 11 days. There's just very few of them. I think there's only 3. Utah, Washington, and Miami. From Wednesday to Saturday of the following week, you could pick up a guy, stream him, get 7 games in 11 days. It really doesn't get any better than that. And it also leaves you Sunday, and it saves your weekly moves for other guys. This is how you end up with the ability to stream 2 or 3 different slots on your roster. Because when someone says, I'm going to stream a guy, that doesn't mean change them every single day. That means look for advantageous scheduling spots and exploit them. And that's one of them. 5 and 7 is the ultimate. You're going to find a handful of those. There's usually one happening at any given moment, but it really limits the amount of players you can actually pick up for it. Like the Warriors have one next week. There's one team, I believe, that has one going on that starts late this week and then rolls into next week. I think it's Washington. They go 5 and 7 from Friday of this week to Thursday of next week. So there's these little things that are floating around. Maybe that's the team you look at if you need to make a move on Friday. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Look for back-to-backs. Look for 3 games in 4 nights. Look for 4 games in 6 nights. Look for 5 games in 7 nights. These are the ways that you can extend the amount that you can stream. This is how you can use 4 weekly moves to maximize games over a longer span. This is how you win for multiple rounds of a playoff. If you're just streaming for 1 week, fine. Boom. You look for the back-to-backs and you roll with them. Easy. That's easy. But I got 4 moves this week, 4 moves next week, 4 moves the week after that. And I got to try to maximize games over 21 days with 12 moves. I could stream 1 slot and make a move every other day, basically, and I'll be left with a handful of additional moves at the end of that, 2 or 3 additional ones that are just sort of floating around. Or I could do what I just talked about. And you look for these interesting little scheduling anomalies where, to serve as an example, let's say you have a Clipper or a Cavalier on your team right now and you want to make a move on Wednesday to move on from them. The teams that I just mentioned, Utah, Washington, and Miami, if you pick up a guy on one of those teams that you like, you could hold on to them for 11 days. That's pretty good. Hold on for 11 days. That basically means that there's 2 back-to-backs and never more than 1 day off over that stretch. That's a huge deal. or you camp out. It also means that there's probably a 5-7 mixed in there for most of those teams. Not guaranteed. Utah doesn't have a 5-7. Their back-to-backs are at the opposite, their bookends. Washington has a 5-7 blended in there. Miami has a 5-7 blended in there. So there's these other ways you can do it depending on what day you want to make the move. And that's why, I mean, you got to look at it from what's the fastest. The most a team can play is every day, which would be a back-to-back. Because you're never going to have a back-to-back-to-back outside of a snow out or something like that. So the most you could stream is a back-to-back. And then you just run percentages. 3 games in 4 days, that's 75%. 4 games in 6 days, that's 67%. 5 games in 7 days. I can't do that math in my head. I think that's like 70? It's 71%. So that's actually the next most, behind 3 and 4. So back-to-back is the best. 3 games in 4 nights is the second best. 5 games in 7 nights is the third best from an actual how many games you're getting percentage-wise, how often the team is playing. And then 7 out of 11 is 64%. That's the lowest. But here's the thing. What those percentages don't build in is the opportunity to not use additional moves, right? For a back-to-back to work every day of the week, you'd have Monday, Tuesday, and let's say you used a move last week. You'd have to use a move on Wednesday, a move on Friday, a move on Sunday. That's 3 moves on that 1 week to try to max out the back-to-backs. If you can find a 5-7, you get 5 games in a week with 1 move. You could turn someone who's playing 3 games in 7 days into 5 games in 7 days with 1 move. That's a net positive. That's a +2 in games played with 1 move. That almost never happens with a back-to-back where you use it over the entirety of the week because you got to look at the original player as well. So that's why these longer stretch ones are actually really important, and it's how you can have more streaming slots on your team. You could probably have 3 slots that you could consider streaming even if you're actually holding on to a guy for 7 to 11 days. To me, that's still a streaming slot because at the end of those 7 days, you're already planning what guy you're going to pick up that has 3 games in 4 days or something like that. Okay, so take your streaming slots and plan them out accordingly. Let's continue to do our example here, and then we'll look ahead to the games coming up tonight. If we are going to do our hypothetical here, we had the Clippers to start the week with a back-to-back. As I said, that's the optimum because that's 100% of the games, 100% of the days have a game on them. Easy enough. 2 days, 2 games. That's the best, and you used a move last week to get to that point. So you didn't even have to dig into your moves cap for this week yet. Awesome. Stellar. Fabulous. Wednesday. Now we're finally using our first move of the week. Let's say we had 3 Clippers for this discussion, and we have 4 moves to use over the course of the week. This is really going hard on the stream, right? 3 streaming slots for a league with 4 weekly moves limit. That's a big deal. Miami would be a pretty easy one to grab. Maybe somebody dropped, I don't know. Maybe somebody dropped Justice Winslow in a head-to-head league where he's relatively useful. Or Dion Waiters, maybe he got dropped. Or Bam, or Whiteside, or Olynyk didn't get dropped. Who are we kidding? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Even D-Wade, I guess. You could pick up that guy. You'll get 3 games out of Miami over the rest of this week. So that roster slot now went from the Clipper, who had 4 games this week, to a Heat, who has 3 additional over the Clippers 2. So it went from a 4-game week to a 5-game week. 1 move, 1 extra game this week. But that's not all. If you can survive this week, and this is where the other streaming slots come into play, Miami goes 4 games in the first 6 days next week, where the Clippers only have 2. So, over that stretch, which is from Wednesday of this week to Friday of next week, that's a 10? Am I getting that number right? That's an 11-game, it's a Saturday. It's an 11-game span. You're able to actually increase your games played by 3 using 1 roster move. And so this is almost like, it's almost a little bit like the weekly lineup stuff that we talk about to a certain degree, but it's weekly lineup that occurs every day you're looking at the next 7-day stretch, at least. Like I said, you might even look up to 11 days in advance to really maximize games played from each of your last 2 to 3 roster spots. And so I think sometimes people sort of miss this fundamental difference between a nightly stream and really maximizing your games with what you have. I will leave it at that. Tuesday night, NBA docket continues with a 7-game slate. Knicks are at the Pacers, Cavs, Sixers, Lakers are in Chicago. The tank is on. Milwaukee, New Orleans, San Antonio, Dallas, Portland, Clippers, and Minnesota and Denver. A couple of things to keep an eye on from this. Obviously, you've got your streaming stuff. There's no Kevin Love for Cleveland. So that would mean, I would guess, more Cedi Osman, more Ante Zizic. If you're looking along that line, that was probably something that I should have looked at, although I'm pretty sure... No, you know what? I think Zizic was probably available. That might have been a slight oversight on my part. Knickerbockers, that's Mitchell Robinson territory. Very little else. I think DeAndre Jordan does bounce back in this next ball game. I don't think he's going to be playing 12, 14, 15 minutes down the stretch. I think it's going to be more of an even split. Pacers, Miles Turner hasn't really looked right to me. He's still blocking shots, but offensively he's been kind of a mess. Well, he's back down outside the top 20, and it's not a huge deal. He did have that 22-17 game, which was huge. His shot blocking has been out of this world, but his scoring has been way down since he came back from injury. I'd love to see him bounce back a little bit in that regard. Just to get even the shooting percentage alone get going a little bit. Kind of proved to me he's 100% fine. Maybe the blocks should prove that to me. His shot blocking this year, he's averaging about 3 per ball game. It's the kind of numbers we were hoping for last year, but just kind of a prove-it game a little bit. Show me that you're okay. And then I think everything else should be all right out that way. Philadelphia, Joel Embiid is back. It sounds like Boban is actually going to be available for this game tonight, so we'll see if he gets his 15 to 18 minutes off the bench. I'm not all that concerned. No Jimmy Butler in this one. I reckon he's probably back later this week. There are a lot of teams that are giving guys. Chicago, Zach LaVine is one of them. We'll talk about that in just a moment. These teams that play one time over 4 games to start the week, one time over 4 days, I should say, they give them that 1 day off, and then suddenly they have basically 4 days off. Chicago and Philadelphia, the same, had 4 days off between games by only giving a guy 1 game of rest. So that's a pretty easy call. I actually think both of those guys probably play on Friday just because of the long layoff. The Lakers are all kinds of a mishmash right now. Kyle Kuzma is questionable, so we might actually see him in this ballgame, and we'll have a better idea of who between Mo Wagner and Jonathan Williams is actually going to soak up some of those minutes. Is Alex Caruso really going to play 30 minutes down the stretch? Andre Ingram, the old Ingram. Pretty cool story, by the way. For fantasy perspective, we don't need to dig deep into it, but very cool that he got signed to a 10-day contract, so he might get out there and go nuts for a few games. This is... one thing to keep an eye on with the Lakers, this is not a back-to-back. So you'll see LeBron in this game. He'll play his 28 to 30 minutes. He'll be missing one of the 2 games on Thursday and Friday this week. Toronto, Detroit. We don't know which one. I would bet he misses Toronto. Maybe he doesn't even have to go across the border. I don't know. Nah, he'd travel with them. So I have no idea which one he's going to skip, by the way. Chicago, like we said, no Zach LaVine. So that means more Chris Dunn, more Lauri Markkanen, and more Otto Porter, and more probably looking terrible without the guy that can create his own offense on that team. This is going to be a tough one. If the Lakers really want to tank, this is a game they've got to figure out a way to lose. Chicago doesn't matter. Milwaukee coming off a loss in San Antonio. They'll look to take out their frustrations on the New Orleans Pelicans. It sounds like Anthony Davis is playing these days. Again, I don't know what the bleep is happening out there. I thought as he started to go into his weird turtle shell that it would sort of snowball a bit, and then guys like Kenrich Williams would get more playing time, or just more touches. Forget playing time. Just be able to do a little bit more when they're on the court. Frank Jackson is the guy that's doing more. But New Orleans is another team with a terrible schedule this week. They have 1 game in the first 4 days of the week. They go back-to-back Friday, Saturday. They also have a game on Monday of next week. So if you picked up a Pell, it would have to be Friday through Monday. That's your move on that team. If you want one of those guys, call him a streamer. San Antonio at Dallas. Jakob Poeltl is a guy I'm keeping an eye on if you need some big man stats. They have the same schedule as the Pelicans over the next, we'll call it 6 days. Spurs, you could technically hang on to all the way through the end of next week. If you wanted to pick them up on Friday, that would be, I believe, 6 games over 10 days. So it's not quite the 6 games in 9 days that you might be looking for in a better case scenario. But 6 games in 10 days is not bad. That's 1 back-to-back blended in. It's okay. It's the kind of thing that you want if this was a guy that you actually wanted to sit on for a while. I don't know if Jakob Poeltl is necessarily that guy. With Dallas, we'll keep an eye on Maxi Kleba. He looked better after taking a couple games off. Maybe he needed to get healthy. That's a team that has a better schedule next week. They've got their back-to-back Wednesday and Thursday of next week. This week, they actually have a fairly crummy schedule. They go every other day, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Doesn't gain you much of an advantage, does it? Probably can't use any Mavs in a streaming slot, but certainly if Kleba puts up some good numbers for a few games in a row, you could use him in a roto spot. Portland and the Clippers. Portland is pretty straightforward these days, outside of maybe Enes Kanter, who to me has sort of drifted out towards the periphery. He's doing his stuff in percentages, but that's about all you're getting out of him right now. Clippers, cut and dry. Minnesota, we don't know what's going on with Cat. I'd like to know. I would bet he misses this game, but I just don't know. I do think he plays again this season. It might just be Sunday of this week. They've got a game today, they've got a game Thursday, and they've got a game Sunday. So if he skips 2 games that they're probably going to lose, even if he plays, maybe they get him back for that toughie in Houston. They have a brutal schedule here, by the way. After beating the Knicks, they have Denver, Utah, Houston, Golden State. 4 in a row that could basically knock them out of the playoff picture. And then I don't know what's going to happen with guys like Cat or Rob Covington. Cat, obviously, who had his consecutive game streak snapped with a car accident, so maybe there's not the same fuel for him to get into the lineup. If you're a Cat owner, this is a time to be a tiny bit nervous and just hope for the best. I think you roll him out there and you just hope. And then Denver, the Gary Harris experience keeps flipping and flopping back and forth. He and Malik Beasley trading off decent ball games. Monty Morris every once in a while cutting into Jamal Murray. You're seeing a situation where it's Jokic easy, Millsap pretty easy. There's no one really coming for their minutes. Will Barton has been getting closer. I like him. But Denver also has not a great playoff schedule until starting Thursday of next week. And then they have a much better stretch where they have 6 games over 9 days. 6 games over 9 days. And you can even stretch it out. They have another back-to-back blended in there over the final week of most people's playoff schedules. And this is a long one, though. I believe this is 14 days, 9 games. I think they go 9 and 14 days. That's one of the better stretches you can have. That's 3 back-to-backs blended in over 14 and no 2 days off in a row. So if you want a nugget, the time to pick them up is... Oh, man, you know what? That actually stretches into the silly season, so that probably isn't even that relevant for you. So you probably stick with the 6 games in 9 days. You pick up a nugget on the 21st, you hold them through the 29th. And this is why streaming is more complicated than just picking up the guy who plays tomorrow. You got to look way down the line. Stream a whole bunch of spots at the same time. Tomorrow, DFS with the great Micah Patria. We'll get the contest rolling again. I won some money last week. Maybe I'll do it again. I don't know, man. Maybe I retire at the top of my game with $18.50 in my DFS account. That was literally my last $3 last week. Put the Clarion call out there yesterday. I'll do it again today in case anybody missed our Monday show. If you would like to learn, and there's some caveats to this. If you would like to learn how to be a fantasy writer, now is a wonderful time to talk to us here at Hoopball. You need to know how to write already. That's the thing. We can't teach you how to write at Hoopball, but if you know how to write, we can take that and we can very easily turn that into fantasy sports writing. Basically, if you can put together a nice, coherent sentence that's grammatically sound, we can mold you. And if you'd like to get involved, it's a fun way to do it. It's trainee program right now, okay? We're going to be teaching folks how to do the blurb feed, and the hope is that it can grow into a more permanent position, but you got to understand the blurbs to understand how to value players and then how to write about them. So we'd love to have you. A couple of you reached out yesterday. If a couple more reach out today, that'd be awesome as well. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. Give me a holler, and I'll hit you with a DM after that. We'll get an email dialogue going, and you can throw a submission into the mix. We're looking to train up some folks at Hoopball, get ready, lead it into the off season. It's a great time to sort of learn the craft, and then you can be a part of us as we grow. Again, hit me up on Twitter. That's the best way to get me, at Dan Besbris. A big thank you once and always to Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. HawaiianIsles.com is the website. Go buy some, you turkeys. I should have just ended the show right there, huh? Go buy some, you turkeys. HawaiianIsles.com, or search for Hawaiian Isles at Amazon. At Hoopball Fantasy, at Hoopball Tweets. Again, at Dan Besbris. Reach out. Let me know if you want to come work for us here at Hoopball. It's a great time to do it. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the pod. Happy Tuesday. DFS day tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.